Hi and welcome, my name is Lawrence Baker and this video is going to be about the brush settings panel in Photoshop CC 2018 release. As of this release, they've given us control over the smoothing. That's all that's changed really. There's been one technology preview change in the brush as well, and I'll quickly point that out as we go along, but definitely smoothing has definitely been introduced. I'm on the brush now, as you can see. Window, brush settings. F5 to bring out the brush settings panel. Brush tip shape. Before we go any further, I'm going to go to clear all the brush controls and also reset all lock settings. So if anything I had locked and anything I had on is now been turned off, I'm back to the bare bones. Brush tip shape can be controlled like that. There are better ways with keyboard shortcuts. I have done a video, link above and below. Right. Flip X and flip Y. This is not the best brush to show that on. Butterfly. Bring up the spacing so you can see what's going on. Bring up the size. Flip Y will flip it on its vertical axis. Simple as that. Flip X, you won't see much with this because it's symmetrical. So I can assure you it does work, but it's very sort of straightforward really. Turn that off. Angle. It can be changed by dragging that arrow there. Also, roundness can be changed using that. Let's find a soft brush. Sorry about this movement of my document window. Let's find a soft brush or, no, a hard brush will do actually. Let's bring the roundness down and the angle. You can see I've got a calligraphy pen type effect. So if I start painting now, I'm using my mouse. You can see I've got like a fountain pen effect. So playing around with angle and roundness is really important. Let's put it back to 0 and that to 100%. Obviously changing the angle on a round brush makes not the slightest bit of difference. Obviously on some brushes it definitely will. Put that back to 0. Hardness on this brush I can control it, so if I clear it now and go LB, it's my initials, you can see it's very soft. But if I picked let's say that butterfly, I cannot change the hardness because it's been created by going edit, define brush preset. That's for another video, but if you create your own brushes like that or someone else has created them, you cannot change the hardness. Important to remember. Spacing, this is really important. Let's pick another brush like that again. What brush is that? Oh no, it's not the brush I actually want. That's a better brush. Now, if I'll make it a bit larger as well when I'm at it. If you bring the spacing up, you're seeing the brush tips. This is really important to understand because the way the brush engine works in Photoshop is on brush tips. So a stroke is just brush tips joined together, so to speak. So a smooth stroke will be like down on 1%. And look, if you untick it, you get complete randomness. So put the spacing on. Right, how do we control this? Well, we can control it with shape dynamics. And as it sounds, it will control the shape of the brush, the size, the angle, the roundness, etc, etc. So let's clear the screen. Let's put size jitter up. If you mouse over, you'll see it says set the size randomness. Really important. This is about randomizing the size. Now, you can see in the preview, not much is happening. The reason being is the tips are too close to each other. If I bring the brush tip spacing up like that, you can see I'm getting different sizes. So that's the problem of not having a Wacom tablet and a pen, because you get far more control. But there are ways to control it if you don't have a Wacom tablet. And the only one is fade. As you can see, the size jitter will work if you don't mind spaced out brushes. But if it's all joined, if it's like a stroke, you want it on 1% spacing, it won't really do a lot for you. But if you use fade, and I've got to take the jitter down here. If you're going to control it, make sure you've got your jitter on 0% if you want it like that. If you put the jitter on and then start to control it, you're going to get more randomness. So you're having less control. So do be aware, because jitter appears everywhere in brushes and it's very easy to start to control it with your pen pressure, let's say, and you've got the jitter up high and you're not getting the results you want unless you want those results. So let's get on. Fade. That means 25 means 25 brush tips. That means I will get 25 brush tips when I go across. Right, like that. Now, if I have minimum diameter on like that, it will stop but carry on. It won't fade off properly. So as long as you're aware of that. So normally when I do the fade, I have it like that. So that's what it is. If you play around with the spacing, obviously we'll have a different effect. If I go like that now, you can see what you're going to get. You can see you can get different types of brush tip shapes if you want to, if you haven't got a pen, but it's not ideal. So what are the other controls? Pen pressure, pen tilt, and stylus wheel. Pen pressure, I have got a Wacom tablet. I've been on my mouse. Let's go to my Wacom tablet now and clear it. Now, sometimes there'll be a warning sign there saying you cannot use pen pressure because you don't have a tablet. So it will warn you, but I know I have got a tablet. So let's make sure size jitters down. And just let me do something with the spacing there so I can show you how it really works. Now I'm going very lightly, pressing hard. So you've got fantastic control, hard, light, with pen pressure. Also, you can use pen tilt. I say minimum diameter, I very rarely use it, but you can set it if you want to. Tilt scale will make a lot of difference. It's at 100, you're probably getting, the normal sort of tilt, but to exaggerate it, you put it on 200. Now I'm tilting the pen around. You can almost see on the screen as I'm hovering over what's going to happen. So like that, and I'm tilting it in different directions. It really is over the top. So I normally have it on 100. It will have, a massive effect on certain brushes, that tilt scale, so you've got to be careful. It's just doubling the effect, basically, at 200%. So, you can bring it right down, the less control you have, but I would normally have it on 100%. Let's point out stylus wheel, because if you've got an airbrush that's got a wheel on it, that's what the stylus wheel is. Nothing to do with the mouse. It's only for, let's say, a Wacom airbrush. So let's turn that off. Let's forget about size jitter. Angle jitter. If I turn that on, I find a better brush. Let's pick that brush. Right, back to shape dynamics. Angle jitter. It's on full. In fact, if I put a bit of spacing on it, you'll see it. And put a bit of size on it, you can see it changing angle. Simple as that. And it is random, of course. If I want to control it, I can use fade, pen pressure, pen tilt, stylus wheel, etc. But there is rotation here, and that is rotating your Wacom tablet pen on a 360-degree roll like that between your thumb and forefinger. I don't have that type of pen, so it's not going to work, or that type of tablet. Fade, we talked about pen pressure, pen tilt, yes, stylus wheel for airbrush. Initial direction, this is really important, this one. If you start off in one direction, no matter what you do when you're going around like this, the brush is angled one way. Simple as that. Direction I find really useful. Right, that direction, go down, it's changing the angle. Go across, it's changing the angle. Now, if you're simulating hair with a hairbrush, that can be really useful. So I love direction. Let's turn it off. Let's go to roundness jitter. Pretty obvious with roundness jitter. You're going to get that. It's just sort of flattening it off on its long and short axis like that. So, yeah, random. Let's turn it down. We can control it with fade, pen pressure, pen tilt, stylus wheel, and rotation. I'm not going to go into the controls too much now because you should have understood them. Right, turning it off. Flip X jitter. That's a permanent flip on the X. To prove it, I go that way. It's jittering it around. You can see the stalks changing. If it's off, you're getting that. So you are randomizing the flip on the X jitter. Flip Y, pretty obvious. You go upside down randomly. Can be quite useful. Brush projection is probably the most not often used. Now you can see as I'm tilting my pen what's happening. I'm tilting it to the right and it's elongating the top of the brush. I tilt it to the left and it's elongating the right hand side. If I tilt it down, off the perpendicular towards me, it's getting longer, the stalk. If I go that way, actually the stalk's getting longer that way, and it's really quite weird. But if you're not confident with all these settings and you're an artist and you know what you're doing with a brush, maybe just ticking brush projection is all you need. But I've never really used it very much, but it's there to be used if you need it. Let's turn it off. Right. And of course, I will point out, if you're using brush projection and other controls, you're adding a lot of randomness in. So, you've got to be careful here. you're not working against yourself all the time by using brush projection and something else and something else and something else. So you've got to be quite careful. Right, that's shape dynamics dealt with. Scattering is very straightforward. If you don't tick that box there, both axes, it means it does it on a perpendicular. So it's scattering it around on the sort of Y like that, perpendicular. If you have both axes on, it means it's doing it in a radial fashion. It's not going around in a circle, but it's almost attempting to, if you see what I mean. So if you put it up really high, maybe it'll get quite near it, but a circle that is. But it's trying to describe a circle. So that's that. So it can be controlled with the usual ones, but I'm not going to go into that now. Count is how much it's going to lay down each time it puts a leaf down. So that's going to be 4 leaves. So 4 leaves each time. There you go. You can jitter it as well. So you're getting different amounts of leaves, and you can control that jitter with the normal controls. That's scattering done with. Texture is a difficult one to explain. But firstly, you come up here. I'm on the nature patterns at the moment, or textures. I can pick, they call them patterns, but when they're here, they're textures. But anyway, I can pick other patterns here as well. But I'm going to stay on, let's say, ivy leaves now. I can invert it, which means like a grayscale invert. What's light is dark and what's dark is light. But it also depends on the blend mode. So there's a lot going on here. You can, as I say, also, if this pattern wasn't in my presets, I wanted to save it to other tools, I could. Right, scale. Let's pick a better brush because this is not ideal. Let's go to the top and pick a general brush. Look at that hard brush here. Scale. Now, you're not going to see much until you've got the blend mode right. So I should come here first, and I'm going to untick texture each tip. Multiply works nearly every time. Now, it requires the percentage of depth to be very high. If I use some of the other ones, I might have to bring it down, but I know multiply will work 99% of the times because the blend mode multiply always makes stuff darker, so I know it's going to work. You don't have screen and stuff here. You only have like multiply down to height there, so you've not got the more of the lightning ones. But anyway, multiply. You certainly don't have screen. So you've got to really start playing around with that. Then you start playing around with scale. How big do you want this texture inside that brush stroke? So that's really quite a large size there. And then you start playing around with brightness and contrast. Now, this is not easy, this texture brush. It really isn't. If you go to texture each tip, sometimes you won't see anything because every tip is textured instead of the whole stroke. But sometimes it'll work. So on some, it won't make any difference. So if I go to height, let's say, and I know with height and linear height, these normally work as well. You've got to bring the depth right down. Now with texture each tip on, it's fine. If I turn it off, clear the screen, it's still okay. But if I put it on with multiply, go up to its normal high amount that it needs, texture each tip, I get that. So it's really a lot of trade-off here. But what I say to you, start off with multiply and a high percentage of depth, then you'll get somewhere. Right, it's really difficult to control this brush. You can play around with depth jitter here. I'm going to bring that brush up a little bit and take texture each tip off. So the minute you untick texture each tip, you can't play around with the depth. So if I go back to height and use that instead, maybe this would be a better example. There you are. I've got depth jitter on, so let's see what happens. Even I wonder sometimes what I'm going to get. And I play around with it quite a lot. I'm getting a little bit of depth jitter, but not a lot. You can control it. If you use pen pressure, then you can play around with minimum depth, etc. So maybe height is the only one you can use with this, all these settings on. There's a lot going on, and I'm playing around with pen pressure now. I'm not seeing a massive amount of difference. Maybe if I brought the jitter up, or maybe put the jitter down and just use pen pressure very lightly, very hard. So yeah, maybe with height, definitely not with multiply, because you have to turn on texture per each tip, and it doesn't seem to work. So there's a lot of experimentation to get this to work. All I will say to you is multiply works really good if you got the depth high and texture each tip off. It's the one that normally works first. Then I would normally go to height or linear height, bring it down there, and I could even get away with texturing each tip and playing around with the depth and depth jitter and controlling it with pen pressure or tilt, etc. I'm not going to dwell on that brush anymore because I actually prefer using a brush that's got a texture on it already instead of putting a texture in another brush. But anyway, let's untick that. Dual brush, almost the same in some bizarre ways. You pick your first brush here, the normal brush. When you go to dual brush, you have the selection again of brushes. What it means is the first brush will dictate the size of the second brush. So it constrains the second brush inside the first brush. So it's like a cookie cutter or pastry cutter. So if I use something like this, and then I've got to make sure my mode's right, and I know multiply works most of the time, so I'm not going to play around with the other modes. I'm going to try playing around with the spacing. Scatter we know about, count we know about, so how many. So I'm getting that effect inside the other brush. Just bring the count down a bit better. So that's what it does basically. It takes a lot of experimentation as well. But, you know, the advantage of it is you can use other brushes instead of a texture, and you could constrain them inside the first brush. So it's all about a trade-off about the size of the first brush and the spacing of the brush and the spacing of the second brush. And it goes on and on and on, Scatter. So there's a lot going on here. I'm not going to dwell on it any more than that. Suffice to say, you can flip it around, and that just flips it, I believe, on, let's have a check actually. That way, I think it flips it on its horizontal axis. Yeah, it looks like it does. Anyway, that's it for dual brush because it is a lot to play around with, and there might be an occasion where you need to use it. It's slightly better than texture because you use another brush, constrain it better, and you have a little bit more control. But it's easier to control, I should say. So I'm going to untick that now. Of course, you can lock stuff here, and it's so damn obvious what you do if you lock it. You can't change it. Anyway, color dynamics is the one that is fun. I'm on a brush like that. Let's bring the spacing down. Right, color dynamics obviously is about color, hue, etc., etc. You only have one control here. That's for foreground, background jitter. I'm going to put it on now. If I don't put apply by tip on, I've got a green foreground color and a reddy orange background color. If I go down once, I get one color, I go down another color, like that. I believe it's changing the saturation each time between the two colors. It could be even changing the hue between the two colors. I'm not 100% sure, but you get this effect each time you go to do one bit of flow, so to speak. If you put apply per tip on, you get this, the snake. So it's quite good. If you take the jitter off, leave that on, go to pen pressure. I'm on my tablet at the moment still. Pressing hard, go green, light, go back to red, already orange, very light. There's something to be gained from using this if you get your colours right. So you can, you know, use shades and tints, etc. Well, you could even better with brightness as well. But, you know, you can. You can only control the background, this background foreground one. Hue, saturation, brightness and purity, you cannot control with pen pressure, etc. So let's turn that off now and keep that down low. I keep apply per tip on. If I bring the hue jitter up, Photoshop picks the colours and I get that. If I untick apply per tip, each time I lay down a stroke, I get a different colour picked by Photoshop randomly. Put apply per tip back on. Saturation, same thing. You know, foreground colour in different saturations randomly. You can play around and obviously get different effects. That's saturation. Obviously, if you take off apply per tip, you're getting a different saturation each time. Apply per tip back on, back down to 0. Brightness jitter should be pretty obvious. I'm getting, you know, different shades and tints of that green. If I bring it down a little bit, it'll be less effect like that. Apply per tip off, get different ones each time I stroke down. I do like color dynamics and I do use it a lot. Purity, let's show you. Now, I've got it on 0%. If I put it on 100%, what it means is how pure the colour is, how saturated it is. So if it's already at full saturation, you gain nothing. But if you put it down to 0, you lose everything. So that's what it's all about, the purity of the saturation. So if you've got, you know, perfect saturation, you're 100%, you're not going to gain from this, but but most people leave it on 0, but that's what it's all about. It makes it more saturated, so to speak. I've never used it in anger, and I don't know many people that have. Color dynamics off, transfer on. It's about opacity and flow. The rest is about the mixer brush. So opacity jitter. Obviously, if I jitter the opacity now, again, we have that problem where it's not doing anything. So I put spacing up like so. I'm on my Wacom tablet at the moment. You can see it's working, but when the spacing's down low, it doesn't seem to do much. So it's pretty pointless if the spacing is close together. But if I turn that to 0, don't forget jitter to 0 if you want full control. Pen pressure, it works very well. This is for opacity, going light now, heavier, heavier, and heavier. It's much, much better than using fade. You can use fade, and it's pretty obvious what fade will do. I'll put it on now, actually. If I put it on 25, you can see, because 25 tips, sorry, I've got 25 there. Return, clear the screen. Of course, 25 tips, obviously the spacing's not very good. So I've put it up to 300, let's say. You can see what I'm going to get in the preview box there. That's the only way with a mouse you can sort of do anything, really. But, having a Wacom tablet is the best thing when you're using opacity. Flow is the same thing. Each time you lay down a stroke, that's flow. It's how much ink or paint's coming out each stroke. So let's turn that off, make sure that's down. Flow jitter, again, you won't see anything unless you put the spacing up, and then, it's pretty obvious what you're going to see. I'm getting different flow, but with the spacing down, it doesn't have much of an impact. If I turn the flow jitter down, don't forget to turn it down, put it onto pen pressure, and as I press lightly, I'm getting, different settings. Of course, you can set minimums here, but I'm not going to go in that. It's pretty obvious what, I can put up to 25% minimum or whatever. But it's not fantastic with a pen at the moment, I have to be honest. Let's try pen tilt and see if I get much difference. Yeah, I am actually with pen tilt getting better. It's not as, spectacular as I thought it would be, actually. I normally use opacity jitter, but it can be controlled, believe me, with the pen and tilt. So it's not as pronounced as the opacity jitter control or opacity control, but it is there. So anyway, that's transfer, really. Brush pose. This is quite difficult to understand. If, let's say, you've got a transfer set for opacity by pen pressure, and I'm on brush pose, and this is only about using a tablet here, I can override that pressure. So I've got the pressure going on and off here, so it does nothing until you click this. If I override it, I'm getting 100% pressure, fixed at 100%. I can't control it at all. If I put it down to, let's say, 47 or 50, I'm getting a fixed 50% pressure. So pressing down hard, pressing light makes no difference. I have fixed it at 50%, let's say. Now, this is on my tablet, which is a Wacom Intuos Pro Small. It might be different on the Cintiq. You might have control up to 52%, but I have no control. That's it. I'm getting the equivalent of 52% pressure. Same for rotation, which is between your thumb and forefinger. That, if I untick it, you've got to tick it to get it to work. You can override the rotation up to 360 degrees, so fix it at a certain degree. Tilt X and Y will go back to minus 100 or up to 100, because obviously you're tilting it like that and like that, so you can have one side tilt and the other side tilt fixed. Yes, there's a lot going on there. I don't know if anyone has ever used it. If you have, please tell me. Right, noise. Pick a soft brush so it becomes pretty obvious. I can actually see the noise then. You're seeing the noise now. Sorry about that. Obviously, if I bring the spacing up, you can see it a bit better, actually. So it's like the dissolve blend mode in that, it's almost exactly the same. And it is random and it has no controls. So let's untick it. Wet edges. Let's bring the spacing down. Emulates a watercolor brush, so you've got these wet edges. Again, no controls. Build up will turn on the airbrush. On a soft brush, it's better seen on a soft brush. If you keep pressing down, it's like an aerosol can. Now, there are airbrush, there's one here, for instance. Then you get all these settings, and then if you've got the preview on, which is under View, Show, Brush Preview, you can see that preview. I believe you can also control it from here if you turn that on and off as well. But it only works on the bristle brushes like this. It has its own settings, and the airbrush ones have their own settings. But we're not using an airbrush. Let's go back to that brush there, make it larger. We're just turning on the airbrush temporarily. It's not an airbrush itself, it's behaving like an airbrush. If you've got a Wacom airbrush stylus, you really will notice the difference using this. But that's what it is. It turns it on. While I'm here, I might as well show you. If I click on that, it's tick transfer. Opacity will now be controlled with pen pressure and only pen pressure. Tick it off. Tick on that one, and that will put on shape dynamics, and size will be controlled by pen pressure. It's more about doing it on the fly more than anything else. Smoothing's always been there. It helps to smooth off your strokes. Let's get a harder brush here now. I'm not using keyboard shortcuts deliberately, but I have got a video on keyboard shortcuts, as I said. So let's use a larger brush. Now, if you turn smoothing on up to 100%, you can see a leash in front of it. That leash, Command and Control K, is from using cursors and show brush leash while smoothing. So that's ticked by default, and the color you can change if you want to. But that's what that leash is at the front, and it helps smooth off your strokes. The options are pulled string mode, which turns off stroke catch up and catch up on end or stroke end. So that's like a circle, and you pull it outside the circle. It's great for following sort of outlines. It is good. I do like it. Never used it in anger, but that's what it's there for. If you untick that, you can play with stroke catch up. I'm trying to get the tip to show up. But basically, if you stop with your brush going along, you know, let's say you're painting there, you stop, it'll always play catch up. See what I mean? If I actually tick that one off, you can tick both of them. So it's playing catch up. Where I stop, it stays. Where I stop, it stays. If I untick that one and tick that one, catch up and stroke end, and go like that, and take off. You can see I took my pen off. Take my pen off, it's caught up. So it's kind of a performance thing, really. Adjust for zoom. Yes, keep that on, because if you zoom right in, you won't have a jagged effect and the brush will work much smoother. So it will be visually much smoother. Protect texture. God, this is not an easy one, I have to be honest with you. No one seems to know how it works, even Adobe. But the way I believe it works is like this. Let's say you've got a texture. You create a texture there. Let's turn all that settings off there and can turn that all off, and put it back to multiply, which I know works. Bring the depth up, untick texture at each tip. What I would do then is lock it, go to protect texture, lock that. Now, if I use any other brush preset, I come up here, let's say, and use hard round. No matter what happens, got the smoothing on at the moment, turn that down. No matter what happens, that texture will be preserved no matter what brush preset I go to, because I've ticked that and locked it. I would have thought if you just ticked texture and locked it, it would have done the same thing. But if you go out to one of Adobe's forums, this is from an employee of Adobe. To utilize the protect texture feature, you can click on the lock in front of the protect texture and texture in the brush panel. With that lock or locks enabled, you should be able to get the same texture on any brush preset that you choose. I find it totally confusing, to be totally honest with you, because I would have thought you just lock the texture down. But that's what they say. Some people say it hasn't worked since the 2014 release as it's intended to do. So, yeah, I don't know. And I think that's the best answer I can come up with. And that's the answer Adobe give. So let's clear it. I might as well show you Symmetry while I'm here. New vertical, accept it. We're doing this quickly. Paint one side, paint the other side. Simple as that. Really good. You can even use the pen tool. Let's get rid of that. Let's Symmetry off. Use the pen tool, press P. Let's create some stuff on the fly here quickly. Go back to the brush tool, B. Symmetry, you can use selected path. Accept it here, you can make changes to the, warp it, etc. Painting either side of the line. I do like it. That's it, guys. I have got other videos. The links will be down below for shortcuts and preferences, and for the changes to the brush panel in CC 2018. This has been about the brush settings. I think I've covered most of it. I haven't done brush shortcuts because it's probably gone more than 30 minutes. I hope you got to the end. I have chaptered it off, but if you sat this long, it won't make any difference. I can't show you much else really. That's really as much as you need to know about brushes. It's been very comprehensive and quite quick, but I think I've covered everything. Thanks very much, guys.